$34 trillion. Say that number out loud. 34 trillion. That is not a budget deficit. That is not a projection. That is the financial death sentence written against the United States of America, and Washington has known about it for years. But here is what they did not know. They did not know the exact day the executioner would arrive. They did not know the exact moment the BRICS nations would stop asking for permission and start building an entirely separate financial world. That day has now come. And the blow they have delivered is not one that can be undone with a press conference or a Federal Reserve interest rate decision. Because when the BRICS nations made their move, they did not fire a single bullet. They did not launch a single missile. They simply stopped needing the dollar. And that silence, that cold, calculated financial silence, is the most destructive weapon ever deployed in the history of global economics. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to a mountain resort in New Hampshire in the summer of 1944. The Second World War was still burning across Europe and the Pacific. But while soldiers were dying in the trenches, the architects of American power were gathering at a place called Bretton Woods to design the financial architecture of the post-war world. And what they designed was a masterpiece of control. The rules were simple. Every currency in the world would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar alone would be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. This meant that if you were a country in South America, in Asia, or in Africa, and you wanted to trade with anyone on the planet, you needed dollars. To get dollars, you had to sell something to the United States or borrow from institutions that the United States controlled: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. In a single afternoon, the United States went from being one powerful country among several to being the undisputed financial ruler of the entire planet. The dollar was no longer just an American currency. It became the blood that flowed through the veins of the entire global economy. For decades, this system worked beautifully for the United States. They could print money to finance wars. They could run up debt without consequence because the entire world had no choice but to absorb their dollars. Every oil transaction on the planet was settled in dollars. Every major trade route depended on dollars. The United States had achieved something no empire in history had ever achieved before: economic domination without the cost of constant military occupation. They owned the printing press that the whole world needed. But then something cracked. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that should have destroyed everything. He ended the convertibility of the dollar to gold. The promise of Bretton Woods was broken overnight. The dollar was now backed by nothing but the word of the United States government, and the word of a government that already had hundreds of billions in debt. By every rule of economics, the dollar should have collapsed immediately. The world should have walked away, but it did not. And the reason it did not is one of the most audacious geopolitical deals in modern history. The United States went to Saudi Arabia, the kingdom that sat on top of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, and made them an offer they could not refuse. The Saudis would agree to sell their oil exclusively in dollars to every buyer from every country, with no exceptions. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection, would guarantee the survival of the Saudi royal family, and would sell them the most advanced weapons on Earth. And just like that, the petrodollar system was born. This was not just clever diplomacy. This was a trap set for the entire world, because now every country that needed energy, which is every country on Earth, needed dollars to buy it. The demand for dollars was permanently guaranteed, not by gold, not by productivity, but by oil. The United States had essentially privatized the global energy market and charged admission in American currency. It was the most profitable monopoly in the history of civilization, and for 50 years it held. Nations that tried to break free of it were punished. Leaders who proposed selling oil in other currencies found themselves facing economic pressure, regime change, or worse. The message from Washington was always the same. The dollar is the only game in town, and if you try to build another casino, we will burn it down. But something changed. Something fundamental shifted in the minds of the nations that had spent decades being told to accept the rules they never agreed to. And the breaking point came not from a military defeat, but from something far more dangerous to Washington, proof that the system could be survived without them. When Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine, the Western response was designed to be a kill shot, the most powerful economic sanctions in modern history. $300 billion of Russian foreign currency reserves, held in Western banks, were frozen overnight. Russian banks were cut off from the SWIFT system, the global financial messaging network that allows banks to send money across borders. The ruble was supposed to collapse. The Russian economy was supposed to be brought to its knees within weeks. It did not happen. Russia had oil. Russia had natural gas. Russia had wheat and fertilizer and metals that the rest of the world desperately needed. China paid in Chinese yuan. India paid in Indian rupees. The alternative payment channels were built around SWIFT, and within months, the ruble had recovered. The Russian economy, while damaged, did not collapse. The sanctions failed to achieve their goal, and that failure sent a message around the world that Washington could never take back. The message was this: American financial power can be survived. Sanctions can be worked around. The dollar can be avoided. The empire has limits, and the BRICS nations absorbed that message, studied it, built on it, and are now acting on it at a scale that has left Washington genuinely terrified. What the BRICS bloc has now assembled is not a temporary workaround. It is not a protest. It is a permanent alternative financial architecture, built specifically to function without the dollar, without SWIFT, without the International Monetary Fund, and without the World Bank. The trading mechanisms they have created allow member nations to settle transactions in their own currencies or in a basket of currencies that includes a component backed by physical gold and real commodities. They have proposed and are implementing their own financial messaging systems to replace SWIFT. They have outlined clearing mechanisms that allow countries to balance trade deficits without ever touching dollar reserves. Now consider what this means in practical terms. Brazil wants to buy electronics from China. Under the old system, Brazil had to convert its Brazilian reais into dollars, run the transaction through dollar-denominated banks, pay fees at every step to institutions that answer to Washington, and hope that the United States did not decide to sanction them tomorrow. Under the new system, Brazil and China can settle directly in reais and Chinese yuan through a network that does not pass through New York, does not require permission from Washington, and does not expose them to the risk of having their reserves frozen because a politician in Washington decides they have stepped out of line. Multiply that by the scale of BRICS trade. These are not small countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the original five, represent nearly half the world's population and roughly 30% of global economic output. With the addition of new members like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia, the bloc now controls a majority of the world's proven oil reserves and a staggering proportion of the critical minerals that the global economy runs on. When a bloc this size decides to stop using your currency, the consequences are not theoretical. They are mathematical. And here is where Saudi Arabia changes everything. For 50 years, the petrodollar survived because Saudi Arabia held firm. Every time, there was pressure to diversify away from dollar oil settlements. Riyadh held the line. The military guarantee, the weapons deals, the deep relationship with Washington, it all held. But the relationship has been quietly fracturing. Saudi Arabia has already begun selling oil to China settled in Chinese yuan. They restored diplomatic relations with Iran, brokered by Beijing, without informing Washington in advance. Their crown prince received at recent summits, not as a junior partner of the West, but as a co-equal architect of a new multipolar world. And the petrodollar foundation is cracking, and when it breaks, the consequences will be unlike anything the modern financial system has ever seen. Here is the mechanism that most people do not understand, and that politicians will never explain to you on television. When countries around the world begin to need fewer dollars for trade, they begin to accumulate fewer dollars in their reserves. And when they have fewer reasons to hold the dollars they already have, they begin to sell them. Those dollars flow back to the United States. Economists call this the boomerang effect. For 70 years, the United States exported its inflation to the world. They printed money, and the world absorbed it because the world needed dollars to function. But when the world stops needing dollars, all that printed money comes home. A tidal wave of dollars, backed by nothing, crashing back into the American economy and meeting a limited supply of real goods. The result is not complicated. It is not political. It is pure mathematics. Prices explode. Purchasing power collapses. The inflation that Americans felt after 2020, the grocery bills, the rent, the gasoline, that was a preview, a small preview of what happens when the boomerang completes its full arc. And now look at what the central banks of the world are telling us with their actions. Because central banks do not speculate. They do not chase trends. They are the most conservative financial institutions on earth, managed by people whose entire career is built on not making dramatic mistakes. And right now, central banks around the world are buying physical gold at a pace not seen in over half a century. China has increased its official gold reserves every single month for more than a year and a half. India has been quietly accumulating. Poland, Turkey, Singapore, the entire global south is converting dollar surpluses into physical metal. Why? Because they learned the lesson of Russia. Because they watched $300 billion of sovereign reserves disappear overnight with the press of a button in Washington. And they realize that if you do not physically hold it, it does not belong to you. A dollar reserve is a promise made by politicians who can break it whenever it becomes politically convenient. But gold sitting in a vault on your own soil cannot be frozen. It cannot be sanctioned. It cannot be deleted from a database. It is the only money in human history that belongs to no one else. The gold that the BRICS nations are accumulating is not just investment. It is the foundation of the alternative financial architecture they are building. The proposed trading currency under discussion in various BRICS documents is partially backed by gold and by a basket of commodities. Not fully. There is not enough gold in the world to back the entire volume of global trade, but enough to give the new system credibility that the dollar has not had since 1971. Enough to say to the world, this currency is anchored to something real. The dollar is anchored to debt. This is the $34 trillion blow, not a military strike, not a trade war, a simple, surgical, mathematically devastating decision by the largest economic coalition in the world to stop holding the bag for American debt, to stop accepting dollars that are backed by nothing but the promise of a government that owes more money than any government in the history of human civilization. What does this mean for you? What does it mean for your savings, your retirement account, your mortgage, your grocery bill? Let me be direct with you because no one on mainstream television will be. The purchasing power of the dollar is going to continue to decline. The inflation you have experienced is not going away. When countries stop needing dollars, those dollars come home. And when they come home, the price of everything you import, electronics, clothing, raw materials, energy, goes up. The standard of living that the Western middle class took for granted for 70 years was built on borrowed time and borrowed money, and the clock has run out. The political response will be predictable. More money printing, digital currencies that governments can program and control, central bank digital currencies that will tell you what you can spend your money on and when, stimulus packages that paper over the cracks while making the underlying problem worse. They will not save the system. They cannot save the system. You cannot solve a debt problem with more debt. You cannot restore confidence in a currency by printing more of it. What you can do, what individuals and families have always done in moments of great monetary upheaval, is understand what is happening before the crowd does. The elites already understand it. The central banks already understand it. They are buying gold, buying land, buying real assets. Anything that cannot be printed, anything that cannot be deleted, anything that survives the collapse of a paper currency. They are not waiting for permission. They are not asking if the moment has arrived. They are acting now, quietly, systematically, while the headlines still talk about stock market records and interest rate decisions. The BRICS have made their move. It is not reversible. The dollar will not disappear tomorrow, but the trajectory has been set. The $34 trillion blow has landed, and the world will never look the same. We are not at the end of a story. We are at the beginning of the most significant financial transformation in a century. The rules that governed wealth, power, and survival for the last 80 years are being rewritten right now. Not in Washington, but in Moscow, Beijing, Riyadh, and New Delhi. The question is not whether this transformation will happen. It already has. The only question that matters is which side of history you will be standing on when it is complete. If this video opened your eyes to something the financial media refuses to touch, then you owe it to yourself to stay informed. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because the next video goes even deeper. into the specific assets that have survived every currency collapse in history, and exactly how to position yourself before the next wave hits. Do not be the last one to know. The information in this channel could be the most valuable thing you watch this year.